Hello, guys. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. I hope you are safe. You saved the next 30 minutes for the next Q&A of day two. We're having a very, very special guest that I will introduce in a second. But before I'll do that, it's a Q&A format, so you have to let us know your questions. And there are two ways to do this. You can either leave them directly in Slido. You can go into slido.com, type the event hashtag, which is 8881. And then leave your comments, or you can do it directly in Teachable by leaving them on your right. Also, if you're a little bit too shy to leave the questions, you can always leave them as like without your name, or you can upvote questions of others. That's also a way to get yourself engaged. Now, without further ado, let's get down to the business. With me, there is Darcy Boles, Head of Employee Experience at TaxJar, and we'll be chatting today about setting up digital water coolers and employee experience. Great to have you with us, Darcy.
Thanks, Magda. I really appreciate it. I'm super happy to be here.
We all are very, very happy to have you and to ask you, I hope hard questions, and I hope we'll get some juicy answers from you as well. Now, to kick it off, let's start with a very basic question, because maybe for the people who are joining, we have people coming from different backgrounds. It's not really clear what a digital water cooler is and what is the role it plays in remote workspace or any space really. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So a digital water cooler, I like to think of it as, let's say you're in a co-located company and you go to the coffee machine or the break room or whatever your office may look like, and you kind of bump into somebody who you may not work with directly on a daily basis. Maybe they're in marketing and you're in engineering. And you just kind of relate on something. You say, hey, oh, you're putting almond milk in your coffee too, or are you dairy free? Awesome, me too. And you kind of connect on something that you two just find out in passing. And so we found that digital water coolers, I like to call that just the water cooler talk. It's just this really basic, casual communication, not generally work related, but helps to create relationships. So digital water coolers are really the same thing. It's creating a chat room or a Zoom video room or a space that really allows for this kind of just casual chat, a way to connect outside of work. Things like connecting about the same breed of dog that you have, or maybe what presents you'd like to buy for Father's Day, which is actually a conversation we have going on right now in our digital water cooler. So that's really like how I like to see it, is a really casual space for people to connect.
Okay, I got it. And it sounds a little bit, I don't want to use this word fluffy, like vague thing. So how do you actually plan for it? How do you execute, such thing as digital water coolers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in general, sometimes there's a view on these types of employee experience tactics, whether it be water coolers or birthday presents or anything that is outside the core work that may seem frivolous to some, and exactly like you said, just kind of fluffy. And TaxJar and myself, I'm a very, very firm believer that these things mean a lot when they're done with thought and with care and with creativity. Trusting your teammates and being connected with them is incredibly important to the core work. And so you got to put that framework in. So the question you asked was, how do you execute them?
Yeah, I asked basically, how do you plan and execute this kind of strategies?
Yeah, absolutely. So I generally find that it works best to start with just one water cooler, right? There's kind of one space, whether it be within Slack or within Basecamp or whatever your team's digital communication format is, where it's a safe place just to kind of, talk about things outside of work, and you set those expectations. We set them within onboarding. We have just kind of a main digital water cooler space. It's named after, for us, it's named after an inside joke within our team. So something that connects you all. And you say, all right,
Tell
here's
us a little bit about it. That's juicy stuff. About the inside joke, and what's the name of it?
It's called Mouse Rodeo, and it came from a game of catchphrase at one of our in-person company retreats a few years back. So it kind of takes a personal take on it. So you can really kind of do it however works best for your company. So in there, you kind of allow all different types of talk. Of course, keep it work appropriate. We set those guidelines. And then we found that within that water cooler, we started to see a lot of topics come up that are around the same thing. So one of those being, we have quite a few vegans on our team, and there are a lot of people sharing recipes. So we created a plant-based group, which is literally a plant-based water cooler where people go to chat about their vegan recipes that they'd love to share. We have a pet space where people literally just talk about pets. So if you start to see a lot of themes coming up within that water cooler, you notice, there's 7 people really dominating that conversation. Maybe it's a good time to make a separate water cooler with that as a topic. And we've kind of just done that organically as it flows. But we found that to be a really, really good way. This one space where you can kind of talk about anything non-work related that, of course, is work appropriate. And then these more kind of topic-based groups that really help to hone in on these topics that people are more curious about.
And how does it work? Do you facilitate it, or does it happen, just all of it organically?
Sure, I'd say it happens fairly organically. I think there's enough. I think it would be a little more challenging with smaller teams, obviously, because there's fewer people engaging. I think as you grow, though, giving the permission, especially in onboarding, that these groups do exist and that it's okay to interact with them, and that's actually a great space to interact with colleagues outside of your core kind of specific team in between our in-person retreats, which happen twice a year. I think really that introduction and giving that permission to interact is really helpful with creating that conversation. People kind of get it. They say, oh, I see other people doing it. You said it was okay to interact. I'm not as shy, right? So that's a very positive way that we've handled it. And I can see that working really well in a lot of other organizations.
Okay, cool. Thanks for saying a little bit more about that and explaining it to all of us. Now we start getting some questions from people who are joining us in. So I will just, jump out of the script and go to the questions we have live. So we have a question coming from Johnny, and he's asking, how do you ensure no one feels isolated across a team of a larger size?
Sure, that's a great question, Johnny. I think ultimately you can't ensure that every single human being isn't going to feel isolated, right? I think that's just a reality of life. We can't control other people's feelings. What we can do is we can set a framework and we can set expectations and give the resources and the permission to allow our employees to connect with each other with the resources we have. I know in a lot of larger teams, there are some people who work remotely specifically because they actually enjoy not connecting with people a lot. That is actually something some people enjoy. There are also people who really want to connect on a daily basis. Myself, I'm a people person. I live in a very remote environment in the mountains. There aren't a lot of humans around me. I thrive with that online connection. That said, we've kind of set a precedent where we have these groups, we have these resources. They are available for you. I'm available. My team is available. If you have any questions or you're starting to feel isolated, we have many forms of feedback loops for people to share of what could really help make their day better and make them feel more connected. And what I tell people, feel free to interact, but also feel free not to. And I think ultimately what I tell people is, ultimately it's at the responsibility of the individual to ensure that they're doing what works best for them. And we are going to provide the framework and the resources to allow individuals to do that. And it's really about empowering the individual.
Sure, that sounds like a smart strategy to apply, not to left anyone isolated. Now, there is another question that has been upvoted by many, and it's from Adam, and it's not directly related with employee experience, but I think you can still, have some observations on this. So, what would you advise Adam, who's asking? How do you translate current job experience into a remote role? 20 years of retail and I can't get my foot in the door.
Totally, Adam. And I think that's a great question. I think a lot of people have that question right now as we're moving into this kind of current and future way of working, which is remotely. I think a big part of it is start educating yourself. There are a lot of tools out there, but there are a few tools that are primarily used kind of cross team remotely, those being Slack, Basecamp, Trello, Zoom. There are tools outside of that, but I'd say those are probably the four main cloud-based tools that remote teams use. Download them, start playing with them, get some trial accounts, start looking at the way other people work remotely. I'd reach out to people who work remotely in LinkedIn and say, hey, can you share your experiences with me? I think that is such a huge part of it. So many remote companies we're working so quickly that it's really hard to take the time to teach those skills. However, if you learn them on your own and you're aware of how remote teams work and really spend that time educating yourself, you're going to do yourself a great service when applying for remote roles.
Absolutely. I think that's a great advice, really, for anyone who's, trying to change into remote work environment. Now, I think I've paid the person who asked this question because I was going to ask this to you anyway. So here's the one from Maggie. Are there any particular projects you and your team will be working on that you're looking forward to this year?
We have quite a few in the works. Obviously, our team is growing really quickly. I had mentioned to you before, Magda, we are kind of in the process of just launched a peer-to-peer appreciation, I'd say probably 5.0, because it's been through many iterations, and really excited to see how that develops. And I was explaining to Magda earlier, it's kind of an appreciation program where people are allowed to or given permission to appreciate one another through a program that we use. And I'm happy to share more details afterwards of really just giving people kudos from each other, from different teams to teams. So I'm really excited to see how that develops. Also really excited, this is kind of an ongoing project, but something we really take pride in is that we have 2 offsite company retreats twice a year. So we meet in person, and we're at our growth rate. Our last 2 retreats, we had 25, if not more, people after each one. So there's those 25 or so people who have not met within these 6 months that we don't have these retreats. So something I'm super personally excited about, and I know the team is really getting together for that magical week in person and getting to know people on an even deeper level to just get the momentum for the next 6 months.
Absolutely. Got it. Noted. And I hope everyone took notes as well. Now, we have also questions about, how does your day-to-day look like? Handling things like encouraging people to staying engaged, facilitating these conversations. For some people that seems like a dream job, but also I think like a job you have no idea what's the schedule here. When we're thinking about I don't know, accountant or some more traditional jobs that are well known, you can probably imagine how the day-to-day look like. So what about your case? Tell us a little bit about your everyday.
Absolutely. So I think the biggest thing that comes to mind just right off the bat is stay creative and curious, and follow through. So a huge part of kind of the day-to-day of employee experience is we're the team specifically, like we handle your paychecks, we handle, the fun things, we handle the HR side of things. And so I'm a really firm believer that anything you can do in person, you can also do remotely. You just have to prepare, plan, follow through, and be creative. So, for example, I always look at where could we be falling short? Like, how am I feeling? The last month, I don't really feel like I've gotten up and walked a lot. I feel like I've been working a ton. I've been sitting down from my computer all day. Work's been crazy. What would really help? Movement. So the other day, for example, I think if I'm feeling this way, there are probably other people who are feeling this way. So very, very self-aware. I know my employee experience team is also. So that said, I put out something in our health and wellness channel, and I said, who's up for a step challenge? Whether it be through your Fitbit, your Apple Watch, a step or a step tracker, and 50 people responded and said, we have a team of 84 right now. 50 people responded and said, I want in. And so we're creating a steps challenge launching next Monday. And, there's $100 gift card up for grabs if you post 15 days out of those 5 weeks and show a photo of where you walked that day. 1, helps people get out and about. 2, keeps accountability. And 3, it's so cool to see people's surroundings when they share their experiences. So keeping a pulse on that all the time, checking in on these water coolers, what conversations are coming up, who's new to the team and just posted about their new puppy. It's really about not moderating, but keeping a pulse and also being very aware of the feedback loop. We use a service called Office Vibe where people can either submit feedback at any time they like anonymously, or there are surveys that go out twice a month that are automatic. And I come through that once or twice a week and respond directly to anything that's warranted to be responded to. Granted, those are just a few things and a few examples of part of the employee experience of what that day-to-day looks like, but I'd say those are really important kind of just engagement pieces of something I really look to do on a weekly basis.
That was helpful to understand better, how do you structure your work? How does your day-to-day look like? Now, my personal feeling is that many companies do not really pay attention, especially those that are in growing phase, because processes break and no one seems to have time to care about employee experience. So what kind of and setting up digital water coolers that we're chatting about, so what kind of alarming signals you would point out, like a waking up calls for these people to like warnings basically, that should make them consider actually working on employee experience strategy and working better on their culture? What are some of the alarming things?
Sure. This might sound like a very blanketed answer, but survey every single one of your employees. Get a pulse. Get a pulse on what your health and wellness score is. Get a pulse on, are your employees happy? What could you be doing to make them feel better? What could you be doing to enhance their lives or their workplace? What are these things? Ask. If you don't ask and you just assume, you're never going to know. And there's very different people in every company, and not every hire is the same, and nor should they be. And so involve them in the process. I am very clear with all the employees at TaxJar. All of us are responsible for culture. It's not just the employee experience team, and it starts with leadership. So I think a huge part of that is asking, and you can start to see those numbers. You can say, where can we be getting better? Also, again, people may think employee experience is frivolous or whatever it may be, but you know what? Your employees are investing heavily in you, and you should be investing in them. And if it's not a two-way street, I don't see long-term success. And so I think that's really where employee experience, it fits that bill within a company. Is we're here to really listen and be this pulse on the company, and also back to that follow-through point. I think, as you said, there are some teams that don't invest in employee experience, and they kind of try to, do it halfway or sort of keep a pulse in setting up these digital water coolers and never follow through. Well, what does that say to your commitment to your employees, right? That just shows that you kind of half care about them. And so my big take on it is either do it or don't. And it doesn't really work with this halfway thing because you lose the trust. So hopefully that will help as a little bit of a wake up and just say how important your employees are. They're the ones who are making your business. They're your team. They're your livelihood. Like, it is so important from a leadership level to invest in them, however that may be, that it aligns with your values.
Noted. And I think the point you made about, healthcare, that's basically should be a wake-up call, whether you really care about your employees, or you just pretend you care about them. So thank you for sharing that. Now we have a few more questions, so let's maybe jump into this one. You have mentioned the company retreats. So that kind of answers the question whether you guys do company retreats. But can you tell us a little bit more about the process? How do you prepare for them? Does everyone get to participate? Basically, how does this look like in your company?
Sure. So I also wear an event planner hat. Which I love to do. And some companies have a specific event planner. Some people will have it be employee experience plans. It just depends. That said, we plan pretty far in advance. Obviously, it can be a little difficult with a team that's growing, so always overbook instead of underbook. But we set 2 dates a year, which are always the same dates, so people can put it on their calendar. Don't usually announce the destination until a little closer to the event, but I mean, you plan it just as you would any large corporate event. I've kind of gotten to the point where it's almost like planning a wedding. You've got a hotel for 100 people, meals for 100 people, catering to different dietary needs, and then of course, kind of the bonding part. What city are you going? Where is a place or a hotel brand that really helps to foster the connection that you're looking for? I mean, for example, when I look at planning these retreats, I say, okay, what's the goal? Well, our number one goal is to create connection, to bond and trust, and to really get jazzed and plan for the following 6 months, right? So it needs to be a combination of high quality activities that kind of help with that connection and bonding, meals, sharing things together, creating a space where people can really interact. Also, we need to have a conference room. We need to have a place where we can really dig down and plan with each other and work together. This is the 2 times a year our team is in person together. Like, let's use it to our best advantage. So I think you start with your goals, and then you build. What I do is I build it around our goals, and I say, where's a city that would work out well for us for these goals? Is it easy to get into? If it's somewhere really far away, well, that's going to be really stressful for people to get to, and they're going to be tired and not be able to really invest with their employees. So every single detail is so important when planning these events. And again, it just goes back to, what do you want to get out of it? What's your ultimate goal? And then you create the event around that.
Got it. Noted as well. Now, there are some questions from folks who probably manage and lead a little bit smaller companies than TaxJar. So what would be your advice to them? What are some must-haves if you have limited resources and budget you would recommend in terms of setting up employee experience and building those digital water coolers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's okay to start small. I think I know quality is so much more impactful than quantity. And I think number one, as I said, even if you have 10 employees, survey those employees still. It's important for everyone to have an impact, because that's how your culture is created, with everyone involved, right? But you do need somebody to own that. And whether or not you're financially able to invest in a person to solely own this, maybe you start a committee and you hold 3 people accountable for ensuring that this water cooler is running or this event is happening. There's a lot of things you can do with limited resources and budget. It doesn't cost anything to create a Slack channel if you already have Slack, right? It just what it costs is time and a little bit of creativity and follow through. So I think really dedicate the people who are passionate about it in your team right now and see where that goes. And then try it for a month. If it's not working, redirect. We have a big thing in our company. Like, it's okay to try things. And if they fail, well, we learn. Did we learn something? Great. We're not going to do it again. How could we get better? And I think don't be scared to try stuff because you're worried that it just might flop. So I think number one, yeah, survey your employees, figure out what they want. And two, start taking action from a small scale.
Absolutely great advice, and no excuses, guys. No excuses, because as Darcy was saying, usually it just takes a little bit of time and a dedication to make it work. Now we have a question from someone who might be working in a collocated model, when some people are working in the office and some people are distributed. So there is a question: how do you make sure that people are engaged in this kind of model, which I personally think is a little bit harder, because people who stay within same physical space, they tend to stick together, and basically they sometimes tend to isolate these people who are outside. So what is your take on this? How to make everyone engaged in a co-located model?
Absolutely. This question comes up all the time. And I agree with you, Magda. It is very difficult to run a successful hybrid company of people who are in office and in a remote environment in terms of culture. I'm only speaking about culture specifically. That said, something that I've heard from people and talked to a lot of people about is, again, this follow through and advocacy. Who in the office is going to be your remote advocate? And I say this because it's super important. A lot of remote employees, when there are people in the office, tend to feel isolated, forgotten about. There's a happy hour on Friday, but they're off working wherever they are because they didn't know about it. Well, if you have an advocate, you could say, okay, I know we're having a happy hour coming up on Friday. Maybe you send them a little drink kit, or say, hey, make yourself a drink at 5 p.m. We're going to call you into happy hour. We're going to make sure you're involved. It's just about planning and getting creative and making sure you have one or two people or a committee or whatever it is on a pulse, and you're including them. We have such incredible technology these days. There's no excuses for not involving every single one of your employees in your culture, whether they live on an island in Malta or whether they are in an office in Seattle. It is so important for you to keep that culture connected, and it's about paying attention and, again, dedication.
Sure, absolutely. Again, guys, no excuses. Doesn't matter which model you're working at, like what's the working model of your company. No excuses again. Okay, perfect. Now we're going to wrap up soon because we are almost on 30 minutes now, and I'll just leave a kind of an open space, an open question for you. So you'll share a little bit of the best practices. So basically, to structure it as a question, what would be some of the best practices from TaxJar in terms of employee engagement and digital water coolers management? Like 2-3 examples of things you guys are doing and that are working well.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say number one, we didn't talk about this a lot, but because it's a whole nother subject on its own. I'd say number one is include them in your onboarding process. If you don't have an onboarding process, create one. I can't stress that enough. So basically what I'm trying to say is, on day one, when you bring an employee into the company remotely, teach them about all these things that you have, if you have them, or if they're coming, right? Let people know that it's okay to engage. Create that space and create that permission from day one. I think it's really important, versus down the road, oh, I forgot to tell somebody we have a water cooler, and then they feel awkward about jumping in. And I think just giving everything up front is really, really helpful. I would say that's kind of the number one thing. I think number two is, finding the commonalities. Again, survey your team. we learned that there are a lot of people that love food on our team. There's also a lot of people who love to read. So I had somebody ask me the other day if she could start a book club. And I was like, absolutely. Here's how you do it. Here's our water cooler where it's appropriate to post a message and have an advocate who can be the person that those people come to say, hey, I was thinking about doing this. Do you think it's cool? Where should I post that? And just let your employees help create the culture that you've already fostered. I think those are the two main takeaways of kind of looking at this at a high level.
Absolutely. I've promised that's going to be the last question, but actually we just got one that I think is very interesting that came through. So that will be our last question for today. So there is a question coming from Mike. What trends do you see shaping employee experience in remote companies and traditional ones? Are there any maybe differences, some different trends for like remote workspaces and traditional ones? What's your take on this?
It's a hard question to answer. I don't know if it's a trend necessarily, but I think a theme that I see coming up a lot is the theme of the work-life balance. And I think with remote work specifically, people actually tend to have less of a work-life balance, contrary to popular belief, because we are so connected. And generally, if you're working for a remote company, you're hopefully pretty happy in your daily life because you can really choose where you want to live. You're not commuting. You can create your environment really around your work. And again, that's all up to the responsibility of the individual, right? Not the company. So I think the trend I see is a little more of not necessarily work-life balance, but the work-life integration. What are the things that companies can be doing to ensure that their employees are happy and taking care of themselves, even though there is a lot of work and that work isn't going away? And that's not to say people are just going to be taking off work all the time, but I think I see a really positive trend just in work in general of encouraging the health and wellness of employees, whether that be during the workday or after, and really giving the resources for people to take care of themselves and the permission that it's okay to do so.
That's a good take on this one, because I'll add something from myself. I honestly think the trends, well, it's a workspace. They're different. One more digital, remote, and other one more traditional. But trends, that shape our life, they are the same. You just approach them a little bit differently. So probably what you were telling us about work-life balance applies to both workspaces. You just approach it a bit differently.
Totally. I think it applies to both. And again, I see a lot of the trends in co-located spaces being the same as remote. As I said, it's really the only difference in remote work is getting creative and using technology. And I see such a higher happiness rate of employees. And it's just, again, about trusting and autonomy and being creative and accountable and ensuring you're hiring for that too, and hiring people that align with those values.
Sure, Darcy. Thank you so much for sharing all your thoughts, strategies, and tactics. I think I took a lot of notes mentally. So I hope I'll take some of this to Remote How. And I'm sure it was also very helpful for the people that were watching us live and will be watching this video later. Thank you very much for your energy bomb. And I see you're really passionate about employee experience. For the folks that didn't manage to, ask Darcy questions, I'm sure she'll be happy to answer them later in the comments, so we can still keep posting them. We'll forward them to Darcy if needed. Or, we have a thing called social media. So that's always a way to stay in touch. One more time, Darcy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Magda. It was so fun to be here. Again, yes, please feel free to ask questions in the chat there. And then also you can find me on LinkedIn just under Darcy Boles. So feel free to connect with me there. Happy to answer any questions. It might take me a little while, but I will get back to you at some point. So thank you again for everyone. It was so cool to be here. And thank you again, Magda. It's been really fun working with you guys.
Bye.